High Chancellor Vexthor gazed at the enormous viewing screen aboard the Zapparian flagship's command deck. His four arms traced deliberate movements while he examined the displayed star charts. For more than 3 millennia, 12 species forming the Galactic Hegemony had controlled this sector of space. They'd constructed magnificent metropolises across far-flung planets, established commerce networks stretching across hundreds of light-years, and preserved stability through calculated negotiations backed by irresistible military strength. Yet something unprecedented had emerged. A fresh species had materialized within their domain. These beings identified as humans multiplying at speeds the hegemony had never witnessed from any civilization. Display the human territorial growth once more, Vexthor commanded his assistant, a towering azure-skinned being named Kelnara. The chart transformed, revealing a modest yellow sun-designated sol positioned at the hegemony's periphery. Crimson markers proliferated outward, each signifying a human settlement or station. Their expansion defied all conventional pattern. While other civilizations proceeded cautiously, founding perhaps 2 colonies each decade, humans established dozens of new settlements annually. They've planted 47 colonies across the last 5 years, Kelnara reported. Their vessels seem crude compared to ours, yet they're manufacturing them in staggering quantities. Intelligence estimates place their fleet above 2,000 ships of varying classes. Vexthor's primary eyes contracted while his auxiliary eyes maintained focus on the screen. What intelligence exists regarding their combat capabilities? Minimal, responded another aide, this one an insectoid creature from the hive planets. They employ ballistic weaponry and chemical explosives. No energy barriers, no plasma artillery, no matter destabilizer. Their technological advancement trails ours by at least 2 centuries. The Chancellor inclined his head slowly. This paradox perplexed him most. How could such a technologically inferior civilization proliferate so rapidly? Most emerging species required centuries to establish even a handful of outposts. Humans had accomplished this in under 10 years. Perhaps they lack understanding of established protocols, suggested Fleet Admiral Morak, a scaled warrior from the militaristic Saurian Empire. Immature species frequently err. They overextend themselves, claim space belonging to others. We've addressed this situation previously, Vexthor concurred. The hegemony had confronted numerous upstart civilizations across the millennia. The approach remained consistent, a demonstration of overwhelming force accompanied by diplomatic overtures. The young species would recognize their disadvantage, consent to appropriate boundaries, and eventually petition for hegemony membership. This formula had succeeded for 3,000 years. Transmit the standard message, Vexthor directed. Notify them they've violated hegemony territory and must retreat to their origin system without delay. Allow them the customary 30 rotations for reply. The communication launched within hours, adhering to ceremonial formats employed for ages. The hegemony declared its authority, enumerated the territories transgressed, and insisted upon immediate withdrawal. The transmission also featured a display of hegemony strength, comprehensive scans of human colonies demonstrating the hegemony's capacity for annihilation at will. The humans answered within 6 hours, remarkably swift. Most species consumed weeks formulating appropriate diplomatic responses. The Hegemony Council assembled to receive what surely would be their capitulation or negotiation requests. The human reply appeared on the central display. Vexthor anticipated an elaborate diplomatic manuscript laden with ornate language and pleas for leniency. Instead, 3 simple lines confronted him. Message received. Terms rejected. Response incoming. The council chamber grew deathly silent. Admiral Morak spoke first. This isn't proper diplomatic protocol. Where are their negotiation requests? Where are their tribute offerings? Kelnara verified the message again. Chancellor, this comprises the entire response. Nothing additional exists. Vexthor experienced an unfamiliar sensation in his chest cavity. Throughout 3 millennia of hegemony history, no species had ever answered an ultimatum with such stark brevity. Young civilizations typically displayed fear. They begged for clemency, proposed tribute, demanded face-to-face conferences with hegemony officials. Could this be a translation malfunction? Suggested the Silicon Federation representative. Their linguistic systems might not align with our diplomatic frameworks. Negative, Kelnara replied after consulting her instruments. Translation accuracy is confirmed. They communicated precisely what appears on screen. The quiet persists. Eventually Admiral Morak rose, his scales clicking with indignation. This constitutes an affront. No primitive species refuses the hegemony's gracious negotiation offer. We should obliterate one of their colonies as an illustration. Hold, Vexthor interjected. raising one of his four hands. Something about the human reply troubled him. Most species either surrendered instantly or attempted delaying tactics through negotiations. Humans had done neither. They'd simply declined and guaranteed a response. What manner of response could a primitive species possibly deliver? Increase patrols along the human frontier, he commanded, and activate the Third Fleet to combat readiness. If humans choose stubbornness, we'll demonstrate what befalls species rejecting hegemony generosity. Meanwhile, within a classified installation buried beneath Luna's surface, Earth's moon, Admiral Sarah Chen reviewed the identical message, just transmitted to the hegemony. She occupied a chair carved from a single asteroid fragment, surrounded by displays showing every human vessel's position throughout charted space. Chen differed from the politicians governing Earth. She was a combat officer forged in warfare's harsh reality. She'd battled through the Titan Rebellion, the Mars Independence War, and the vicious campaign purging asteroid belt pirates. She understood that when facing threats against humanity, only two choices existed: surrender or combat. The hegemony expected humanity would choose surrender. They miscalculated. Initiate Protocol 7, Chen ordered her aide, a young captain named Roberts. Contact Captain Volkov. Inform him the time has arrived. Roberts paled visibly. Protocol 7 represented humanity's most classified military directive. Only 12 individuals across the entire solar system knew its meaning. Admiral, are you certain? Once initiated, there's no reversal. Chen studied the star chart displaying human colonies scattered across dozens of worlds. Each represented millions of human lives. Families who'd abandoned Earth to forge new homes among the stars. Children who'd never witnessed their species' birthplace. All now threatened by aliens presuming humans would simply capitulate and crawl back to their home system. I'm certain, Chen replied. Transmit the message. Captain Marcus Volkov received the communication while floating weightless aboard the most classified vessel in human space. The ship possessed no official designation, no registry code, and according to all public documentation didn't exist. The crew named it Nemesis. Appropriately, Volkov differed from typical ship captains. He'd volunteered for missions other officers deemed suicidal. He'd commanded boarding parties against pirate vessels, engaged in close-quarters combat within enemy ship corridors, and once destroyed an entire rebel installation by ramming his crippled ship into their reactor. His crew called him Reaper. He'd never lost an engagement. Admiral Chen's message was concise. Execute Omega Protocol. Target hegemony. Authorization mankind. Volkov smiled, though the expression held no warmth. He'd awaited this directive for 5 years. The Nemesis had been constructed for one purpose: showing the galaxy the consequences of threatening humanity. Today the aliens would discover why humans ranked among the most dangerous species in known space. All personnel prepare for launch, Volkov announced shipwide. We have work ahead. The Nemesis began moving. It measured smaller than most military craft, merely 300 meters long compared to the kilometer-long dreadnoughts other species favored. Yet size held no significance when carrying humanity's most devastating weapon ever conceived by human ingenuity. Aboard the Hegemony flagship, sensors registered a solitary human vessel departing their territory. Admiral Morak laughed witnessing the readings. One ship, he remarked to Chancellor Vexar. They dispatch a single small vessel against 12 civilizations' combined might. These humans prove even more primitive than assessed. Vexar didn't laugh. Something felt wrong about the situation. Species facing surrender didn't send ships toward enemy territory. They sent diplomats. They sent messages begging mercy. What vessel classification? He asked his sensor operator. Unknown design, came the response. Appears to be some escort-class ship. No heavy armament detected. Minimal shielding. It presents no threat to our forces. Yet Vexar hadn't survived 3 centuries of politics by dismissing his instinct. He'd learned to heed troubling feelings, even when logic couldn't explain them. Message all fleet commanders, he directed. Elevate alert status to yellow. I want continuous updates on that human vessel. The Nemesis continued its journey toward human space's edge where the Galactic Hegemony's combined fleets awaited. Captain Volkov stood on the bridge, observing the stars ahead. Within hours he'd reach the coordinates where the alien armada gathered. Within hours the galaxy would learn humanity's response when someone threatened their children. His crew worked silently around him. Everyone knew this likely meant a one-way journey. The Omega Protocol had been designed with one objective: maximum enemy damage regardless of cost. Survival wasn't part of the equation. Captain, his communications officer called, we're receiving a transmission from the alien fleet. They're demanding we halt and surrender. Volkov didn't even glance at the message. Send our standard reply. What should I communicate, sir? Volkov's smile grew colder still. Tell them they should have negotiated when opportunity existed. The message transmitted, and Nemesis maintained course. Behind it, the Galactic Hegemony's combined fleets prepared for what they assumed would be easy victory against a single primitive vessel. They had no conception of what approached. In space's depths, ancient physics laws waited to be violated. Technologies defying every known principle of safe warfare sat ready for deployment, and at its center Captain Marcus Volkov, prepared to demonstrate why humans had never lost a war. The aliens wanted to know what humanity dispatched instead of negotiators. They were about to discover the answer. The Nemesis glided through space like darkness among stars. To external observers, it resembled just another human military ship. 300 meters of dark metal and ceramic armor, indistinguishable from hundreds of other vessels protecting human settlement. Yet Captain Marcus Volkov knew better. He knew what lay concealed within the ship's core, sealed behind security layers making bank vaults look like toy containers. Volkov stood in the ship's control center, monitoring the tactical screen as they approached human space's boundary. The alien fleet was assembling at the border, exactly as Admiral Chen had predicted. 12 different species, all believing they could intimidate humanity into surrender through a show of strength. Status report. Volkov ordered his executive officer, Commander Lisa Park. Park had served with Volkov for 8 years, following him through conflicts most officers wouldn't survive. She was among the few in the fleet truly comprehending the Nemesis's design purpose. 6 hours from the target zone, Park reported. All systems functioning within normal parameters. The crew stands ready. Volkov nodded. The Nemesis crew differed from any other in the human fleet. Every single person aboard had volunteered for what they termed the final mission. They all understood that once the Omega Protocol activated, no homecoming awaited. The weapon they carried was too dangerous to risk enemy capture. Sir, the communications officer called, we're receiving another transmission from the alien fleet. They're demanding self-identification and statement of intentions. Disregarded, Volkov replied. They'll learn our intentions soon enough. Truth was, the Nemesis held no official classification in the human military. According to all public documentation, the ship was non-existent. It had been constructed secretly at a hidden facility beyond Pluto, using technologies most human scientists considered impossible or insane. The project required combined efforts from humanity's finest minds in physics, engineering, and computer science. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the ship's science officer, approached Volkov carrying a tablet displaying complex equations. Kane was among the scientists who designed the weapon now dormant in the ship's core. She was also the sole person aboard fully comprehending its operation. Captain, I need to review the activation sequence again, Kane said. Once we begin the process, no stopping it exists. Are you certain we should proceed? Volkov took the tablet and examined the equations describing humanity's most terrible creation. The mathematics strained his comprehension, but he grasped the fundamental principle. The weapon wasn't designed to destroy ships or planets. It was designed to destroy civilizations. Doctor, how many human colonies exist in the disputed territory? He asked. 47 confirmed settlements, Kane replied. Approximately 15 million people. And how many of those people do you believe the aliens will spare if we surrender? Kane remained quiet momentarily. She'd read the intelligence reports about the Galactic Hegemony. Their history overflowed with examples of what happened to species refusing submission. Some were enslaved, others relocated to reservations on barren planets. A few simply vanished from historical records. I understand, Captain, she said finally. I'll begin the preliminary activation sequence. As Kane departed, Commander Park moved closer to Volkov. Marcus, she said quietly, using his first name as she only did when discussing something serious. Are we doing the right thing? Maybe the aliens are willing to negotiate. Maybe we don't need to use the weapon. Volkov understood her concern. Park had children back on Earth. A daughter just starting school and a son who wanted to join the space fleet when he grew up. The thought of those children growing up in a galaxy where humanity was forced to hide in a single star system was unbearable. Lisa, he said, what do you think would happen if we returned to Earth and told them we chose not to use our advantage? How long before another alien empire decided humans looked weak? Park nodded slowly. She'd fought enough battles to understand deterrence logic. Sometimes the only way to prevent war was showing your enemies the cost of fighting you was too high to bear. Besides, Volkov continued, the aliens had their chance to negotiate. They chose to send an ultimatum instead. Now they discover what humans send instead of diplomacy. The Nemesis continued toward the border, its engines humming quietly in darkness. In the engineering sections, the crew made final preparations for what was coming. They checked and rechecked every system, knowing a single malfunction could doom not just their mission, but potentially the entire human species. Chief Engineer Tom Rodriguez supervised the work with intensity born from knowing millions of lives depended on his equipment functioning perfectly. Rodriguez had built engines for colony ships and weapons for warships, but nothing he'd ever worked on compared to the device now waiting in the ship's core. "Chief," one of his technicians called, "the containment field is showing some fluctuation. Should we be concerned?" Rodriguez moved to the console and studied the readings. The fluctuation was tiny, well within acceptable parameters. Yet with this weapon, even tiny variations could have catastrophic consequences. "Run a full diagnostic," he ordered, "and increase the field strength by 5%. I don't want any surprises." The weapon giving the Nemesis its terrible purpose was the result of humanity's darkest scientific achievement. It had been created by a team of researchers who'd asked themselves a simple question: what was the most efficient way to destroy an advanced technological civilization? The answer they'd found was both elegant and horrifying. Instead of building bigger bombs or more powerful energy weapons, they'd created something that turned an enemy's own technology against them. The weapon was a form of self-replicating nanotechnology, but unlike anything ever built before, the nanobots were designed to consume and convert any non-human technology they encountered. They would spread through enemy ships like a plague, turning hull plating into more nanobots, converting computer systems into manufacturing centers, using the enemy's own resources to build more copies of themselves. Yet the truly terrifying part was that the nanobots were programmed to distinguish between human and alien technology. They would consume a hegemony battleship down to the last bolt, but wouldn't touch so much as a human flashlight. It was a weapon of absolute discrimination designed to leave human forces completely untouched while destroying everything else. The project had been codenamed Pandora, and like the mythical box, once opened, no closing it again existed. Kane finished the preliminary activation sequence and reported to the bridge. "Captain, the weapon is ready for deployment. All we need is your final authorization code." Volkov looked at the tactical display one more time. The alien fleet was massive, over 3,000 ships representing the combined military might of 12 different species. By any reasonable measure, the Nemesis should have been destroyed the moment it entered their weapons range. Yet reason had nothing to do with what was about to happen. "Sir," the sensor operator reported, "we're detecting movement in the alien fleet. They're moving to intercept us." "How long until they're in weapons range?" Volkov asked. 20 minutes. "Sir." Volkov nodded. The time had come to send humanity's message to the Galaxies. He walked to the command console and entered his personal authorization code. A new display appeared showing a single red button, labeled with words that made even seasoned warriors pause. "Omega Protocol Final Authorization. All hands, this is the captain," Volkov announced shipwide. "In 15 minutes we will engage the enemy fleet. Remember that we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for every human child who deserves to grow up free among the stars. We're fighting for the right of our species to exist without permission from aliens who think they own the galaxy." He paused, looking around at his crew. They were all volunteers, all people who had chosen to risk everything for humanity's future. The aliens wanted to know what humans send instead of negotiators. He continued, "Today they find out. Prepare for weapons deployment." Kane took her position at the weapons control station. The Nemesis carried conventional weapons as well, missiles and energy cannons that could fight off a few enemy ships, yet those weapons were just for show. The real weapon was something no alien empire had ever faced before. "Weapon status?" Volkov asked. "Ready for deployment, Captain," Kane replied. "The nanobots are stable and awaiting release command." The alien fleet grew larger on the tactical display as they approached. Volkov could see individual ship classes now. Zapirian dreadnoughts, Saurian assault cruisers, Silicon Federation science vessels. Thousands of years of galactic civilization represented in that fleet. All of it about to learn what happened when someone threatened humanity's children. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "the aliens are transmitting a final surrender demand. They're giving us one last chance to turn back." Volkov smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Send them our response." "What should I tell them, sir?" "Tell them that humanity appreciates their concern for our welfare," Volkov replied, "and tell them they should have thought about the consequences before threatening our colonies." The message was transmitted and the Nemesis continued on its course toward the waiting alien fleet. Within minutes, the most advanced military force in galactic history would face humanity's answer to their ultimatum. They had wanted to know what humans would send instead of diplomats. they were about to discover. Admiral Kethmore of the Zapirian Navy stood on his flagship's bridge, the infinite glory watching as the single human vessel approached his armada. Around him, the greatest military force in galactic history waited in perfect formation. 3,000 ships from 12 different civilizations, each representing centuries of advanced technology and military experience. The human ship was laughably small compared to his dreadnought. The infinite glory alone stretched over 2 kilometers long, armed with plasma cannons capable of cracking a planet's crust and protected by energy shields that could withstand stellar explosions. The approaching human vessel looked like a toy by comparison. Admiral, his tactical officer reported. The human ship is now within weapons range. Shall we disable it and take the crew prisoner? Kethmore considered the question. Standard procedure would be disabling the ship and capturing its crew for interrogation. The Hegemony could learn valuable information about human military capabilities. Yet something about the situation bothered him. Why would the humans send a single ship against such overwhelming odds? Open a communication channel, he ordered. I want to speak with whoever commands that vessel. The main screen activated, showing the human ship's bridge. Kethmore found himself looking at a middle-aged human male with cold, dark eyes and several scars across his face. The human wore a simple military uniform with no decorations or medals. I am Admiral Kethmore of the Galactic Hegemony, he announced. You are Captain Volkov, the human replied. His voice was calm, showing no fear despite being outnumbered 3,000 to 1. Captain Volkov, you are in violation of Hegemony space. Surrender immediately and your crew will be treated according to galactic law. Volkov smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Admiral, I appreciate your concern for my crew's welfare, but I'm afraid we're not here to surrender. Kethmore felt a flash of anger. How dare this primitive alien show such disrespect? Captain, you have 1 ship, I have 3,000. Your species uses primitive projectile weapons while we command the power of stars themselves. What possible threat could you pose to this fleet? You're about to discover, Volkov replied and severed the communication. Kethmore stared at the blank screen momentarily, then turned to his weapons officer. Target their engines. I want that ship disabled, not destroyed. We'll show these humans what happens to species that refuse hegemony generosity. Yet before the weapons officer could respond, the sensor operator called out an alarm. Admiral, the human ship is releasing some kind of payload. Multiple objects, very small, spreading in all directions. On the tactical display, Kethmore could see what looked like a cloud of metallic dust expanding from the human vessel. The particles were tiny, barely detectable by his sensors, and they were moving in all directions at incredible speed. What are they? He demanded. Unknown, sir, the sensor operator replied. They appear to be some kind of metallic particles, but they're too small to analyze properly. Kethmore laughed. Chaff, they're trying to confuse our sensors with primitive chaff. He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to all ships. Tell them not to be fooled by this pathetic display. Begin the attack. The Hegemony fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams and plasma bolts converged on the human ship, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Yet to everyone's surprise, the human vessel's shields held. They flickered and sparked under the massive assault, but they didn't fail. Impossible, Kethmore muttered. Their technology is primitive. Those shields should have collapsed immediately. Sir, the tactical officer reported. Our weapons are having minimal effect. The human ship appears to have some kind of adaptive shielding. Kethmore was about to order a concentrated assault when his sensor operator called out again, this time with panic in his voice. Admiral, something's wrong with the Crimson Talon. On the display, one of the Saurian assault cruisers was behaving strangely. Its hull plating seemed to be moving, shifting and flowing like liquid metal. As they watched, pieces of the ship's armor began to fall away. Yet instead of floating in space, they seemed to be dissolving into more of the metallic particles. What's happening to that ship? Kethmore demanded. Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the infinite glory. The ship's computer announced, warning, unauthorized access detected in secondary computer systems. Warning, hull breach in Section 7. Warning, life support failure in Deck 12. Kethmore felt ice form in his blood. There had been no impact, no explosion, no attack of any kind. How could his ship be suffering multiple system failures? Engineering report, he shouted. The chief engineer's voice came over the communication system, and Kethmore could hear fear in it. Admiral, we have a problem. Something is in our computer system. It's rewriting our code, taking control of our fabrication units. And sir, it's converting our own hull plating into more of itself. On the tactical display, more ships were beginning to show the same symptom. Hulls flowing like water, internal systems failing, pieces of the ships themselves dissolving into clouds of metallic particles that then spread to nearby vessels. "Sir," the sensor operator reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "the particles are nanobots. They're self-replicating, and they're converting our ships into more nanobots." Kethmore stared at the display in horror as he finally understood what was happening. The humans hadn't sent a conventional weapon. They had sent a plague, a technological virus that consumed everything it touched and used the consumed material to make more of itself. "All ships, emergency retreat," he ordered. "Maximum speed. Get away from the infected vessels." Yet it was too late. The nanobots had already spread to dozens of ships, and each infected vessel became a source of more nanobots. The cloud of metallic particles grew larger and larger, spreading faster than the fleeing ships could travel. The Crimson Talon was the first ship to be completely consumed. In less than 10 minutes, the kilometer-long assault cruiser dissolved entirely, leaving behind only a swirling cloud of nanobots that immediately began seeking new targets. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving distress calls from across the fleet. Ships are reporting system failures, hull breaches, loss of life support. The nanobots are spreading faster than we can retreat." Kethmore watched in fascination and terror as the greatest military force in galactic history began to dissolve before his eyes. The nanobots showed no mercy, no discrimination. They consumed Zapirian dreadnoughts and Silicon Confederation science vessels with equal efficiency. Advanced plasma cannons and primitive projectile weapons were converted into more nanobots with the same mechanical precision. "Sir," the tactical officer said, "the human ship is transmitting a message. It's being broadcast on all frequencies." "Put it on screen," Kethmore ordered. Captain Volkov appeared again, still calm despite the chaos surrounding his vessel. "This is Captain Marcus Volkov of the human starship Nemesis. You wanted to know what humanity sends instead of negotiators. This is what we send. We don't just fight back when threatened, we make sure the threat is eliminated permanently." He paused, looking directly at the camera. "Your ultimatum demanded that humanity withdraw to our home system and abandon our colonies. You threatened to use force against civilian populations, including children. You believed that superior numbers and advanced technology would make us surrender." Around the Nemesis, the hegemony fleet continued to dissolve. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for centuries were being consumed by their own technology, as the nanobots converted their systems into weapons against them. "You were wrong," Volkov continued. "Humanity does not negotiate with those who threaten our children. We eliminate them. The nanobots you see consuming your fleet are programmed to distinguish between human and non-human technology. They will not harm a single human vessel, but they will consume every alien ship in this system." Kethmore tried to speak, to order a response, but his voice failed him. Around his own ship he could see the hull plating beginning to shift and flow. The nanobots had reached the infinite glory. "The weapon is self-limiting," Volkov said. "After consuming all available non-human technology, the nanobots will deactivate. Your species will survive, but your military capabilities will be reduced. Consider this a lesson in the consequences of threatening humanity." The transmission ended, leaving Kethmore alone with the horror of what was happening to his fleet. Through the viewing ports, he could see other ships in various stages of dissolution. Some were completely gone, leaving only clouds of nanobots. Others were partially consumed, their crews evacuating in whatever escape pods hadn't yet been converted. "Admiral," his chief engineer reported, "we've lost main power. The nanobots have consumed our reactor core and are using it to build more of themselves. I estimate 15 minutes before complete structural failure." Kethmore slumped in his command chair, watching as the most powerful military force in the galaxy was systematically destroyed by a weapon that turned their own technology against them. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had shown that all their advanced weapons and sophisticated defenses were useless against an enemy that could convert those very advantages into weapons. "Sir," the communications officer said weakly, "should we send a surrender message?" Kethmore almost laughed. Surrender to whom? The human ship was still there, still intact, but it was no longer the target of the nanobots. The weapon was specifically designed to ignore human technology while consuming everything else. "Send a fleet-wide evacuation order," he said finally. "All personnel to escape pods. Abandon ship." As the crew of the Infinite Glory prepared to abandon their vessel, Kethmore took one last look at the tactical display. In less than 2 hours, the Hegemony had lost 90% of its military strength to a single human ship. The survivors would return home with news that would change the galaxy forever. The humans were not just another primitive species to be bullied into submission. They were something far more dangerous, a civilization willing to destroy everything, including themselves rather than submit to alien rule. In the depths of space, the nanobots continued their work, converting the pride of 12 civilizations into more copies of themselves. And through it all, the Nemesis waited patiently, its crew watching as humanity's message was written in the dissolution of alien warships. The galaxy had wanted to know what humans sent instead of diplomats. Now they knew. High Chancellor Vexor received the emergency transmission while attending a cultural ceremony on his homeworld of Zephyr Prime. The message was brief but devastating. Fleet destroyed. Nanobots. Request immediate evacuation of all hegemony systems. At first, Vexor thought it was some kind of joke. The combined fleet at the human border represented the greatest military force in galactic history. How could it simply be destroyed? And what were nanobots? Yet as more reports arrived, the terrible truth became clear. The humans hadn't sent the negotiators or surrender offers. They had sent a weapon that violated every principle of civilized warfare. A weapon that consumed technology itself. Show me the sensor recordings. Vexor ordered his communication staff. The holographic display in his office showed the final moments of the hegemony fleet. Vexor watched in growing horror as ship after ship dissolved into clouds of metallic particles. The mighty dreadnoughts that had maintained galactic peace for centuries were consumed as easily as insects in acid. How many ships survived? He asked. Approximately 200. Chancellor, his aide, Kelnara, reported. Most of them small escort vessels that were far enough from the initial deployment to escape. All capital ships were lost. Vexor felt his four hearts racing as the implications became clear. In a single engagement, humanity had crippled the military power of 12 civilizations. Yet worse than the immediate loss was what it represented. The humans possessed a weapon that could destroy any technological civilization. What about our shipyards, our orbital installation? Kelnara's expression grew even more grim. Chancellor, we're receiving reports from across space. The nanobots appear to be spreading. Our deep space monitoring stations have gone silent. 3 major shipyards have been completely consumed. The reports continued to arrive throughout the day, each one worse than the last. The nanobots weren't just a weapon that destroyed ships. They were a plague that consumed all non-human technology they encountered. Space stations, orbital platforms, even satellites were being converted into more nanobots. On the industrial world of Saurian Prime, the reptilian Admiral Morak watched from a mountain bunker as the planet's orbital shipyards disappeared. The massive construction platforms that had built warships for 1,000 years were dissolving like sugar in water, their metal and circuits converted into swarms of microscopic machines. Sir, one of his officers reported, the nanobots have reached the surface installation. Our manufacturing centers are being consumed. Morak had built his career on the principle that superior firepower could solve any problem. He had conquered rebellious worlds, destroyed pirate fleets, and enforced hegemony law across dozens of star systems. Yet how do you fight an enemy that turns your own weapons against you? What about ground forces? He asked. Surely these nanobots cannot affect soldiers and equipment on planetary surfaces. The answer came within hours. The nanobots could indeed affect ground-based technology. They consumed tanks and aircraft with the same efficiency they had shown against spaceships. Only biological troops with primitive weapons were safe, and the hegemony hadn't trained for primitive warfare in centuries. On the Silicon Confederation homeworld, a different kind of tragedy was unfolding. The silicon-based beings, who made up the Confederation, existed in a symbiotic relationship with their technology. Their bodies were partly mechanical, enhanced with computer implants and cybernetic organs. Veltar, the Confederation's leading scientist, studied the nanobots through a sealed observation chamber. What she saw challenged everything she understood about the laws of physics and engineering. The nanobots are impossibly sophisticated. She reported to the Confederation Council. They can distinguish between human and non-human technology at the molecular level. They appear to have some kind of built-in database that recognizes the atomic signatures of every known alien alloy and computer component. How is that possible? Asked Council Leader Zar. It should not be possible, Dr. Veltar replied. The computational power required to make such distinctions in real time would require a computer the size of a moon. Yet these nanobots, each one smaller than a virus, somehow possess that capability. The most disturbing part was that the nanobots seemed to learn and adapt. Early attempts to fight them with energy weapons had failed because the nanobots quickly developed resistance to different types of energy. They absorbed plasma bolts, deflected laser beams, and converted particle beam weapons into more raw material for replication. Yet the true scope of the disaster became clear when the reports from the outer systems arrived. The nanobots weren't just spreading random. They were targeting the most critical installations first: communication arrays, sensor networks, military bases. It was as if they had been programmed with detailed knowledge of hegemony infrastructure. Within 72 hours of the initial deployment, the Galactic Hegemony had effectively ceased to exist as a military power. Their fleets were gone, their shipyards consumed, their industrial capacity destroyed. Billions of beings found themselves trapped on their homeworlds, cut off from the galactic community they had ruled for 3 millennia. Chancellor Vexar stood in his office, watching the reports stream in from across what had once been hegemony space. Each new message brought word of another system going dark, another installation being consumed by the unstoppable nanobots. "Chancellor," Kelnara said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's being broadcast on all frequency." The main display activated, showing a middle-aged human female in a military uniform. Vexar recognized her from intelligence files. "Admiral Sarah Chen, Commander of Earth's Space Forces. I am Admiral Chen of the United Earth Space Command," she began. 72 hours ago, the Galactic Hegemony delivered an ultimatum to humanity. "You demanded that we abandon our colonies and withdraw to our home system. You threatened to use force against civilian populations if we refused." Chen paused, her expression cold and professional. "Humanity has responded to your ultimatum. As you have no doubt observed, your military forces have been neutralized. Your shipyards and weapons production facilities have been eliminated. Your ability to threaten human colonies no longer exists." Vexar felt a chill run through his body. The human's tone was not that of a victor gloating over a defeated enemy. It was the tone of someone delivering a business report. "The nanobots deployed by our forces are programmed with specific limitations." Chen continued. "They will consume all non-human technology they encounter, but they will not harm biological life directly. Your populations are safe, but your technological civilization has been reset to pre-industrial level." The implications hit Vexar like a physical blow. The hegemony species had been dependent on advanced technology for thousands of years. Most of their worlds couldn't support their populations without technological assistance. Food production, water purification, atmospheric processing, all of it required the technology now being consumed by human nanobots. However, Chen said, "Humanity is not without mercy. We are prepared to offer humanitarian assistance to refugee populations. We will provide transport, food, and temporary shelter for beings who are willing to relocate to designated worlds where they can rebuild their civilizations." Vexar almost laughed at the irony. The humans were offering to help the same beings they had just defeated. It was either incredible generosity or incredible arrogance. "This assistance comes with conditions," Chen continued. "Any species that accepts human aid must agree to formal non-aggression treaty. You will not threaten human colonies, human civilians, or human interests. You will not attempt to rebuild military forces capable of interstellar warfare. You will exist peacefully within the boundaries we established." The transmission ended, leaving Vexar alone with the magnitude of humanity's victory. In less than a week, the humans had gone from being an unknown primitive species to the dominant power in this region of the galaxy. They hadn't just defeated the hegemony, they had completely restructured the balance of power. "Sir," Kelnara said hesitantly, "what are your orders?" Vexar looked out the window of his office at the city below. Already he could see the effects of the nanobot plague. Power grids were failing as the technology that maintained them was consumed. Transportation systems were shutting down. In a matter of days, his advanced civilization would be reduced to a pre-technological state. "Send a message to all hegemony worlds," he said finally. "Tell them to begin evacuation procedures. Accept the human offer of assistance." It was the hardest decision he had ever made. Yet Vexar understood that pride was a luxury his species could no longer afford. The humans had demonstrated they possessed weapons capable of destroying any technological civilization. Resistance would only lead to complete extinction. As he composed the surrender message, Vexar reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. The hegemony had been so confident in their superiority, so certain that primitive humans would submit to their demands. They had failed to consider that a species desperate enough might develop weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The humans had sent their message to the galaxy, written in the dissolution of the greatest military force in known space. That message was simple: threaten humanity's children and face the consequences. Across the former hegemony territory, the nanobots continued their work, consuming the remnants of 3,000 years of galactic civilization. And through it all, human ships arrived to offer aid to the refugees, providing food and shelter to the beings whose empires they had just destroyed. It was perhaps the most terrifying display of power the galaxy had ever seen. The ability to completely destroy an enemy civilization while simultaneously offering to help them rebuild it. 6 months after the nanobots had finished their work, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Hegemony. The massive chamber on the neutral world of Concordia had been designed to hold representatives from hundreds of species, but today only a dozen delegates sat in the vast space. The survivors of the hegemony disaster had gathered to establish what they called the new Galactic Council. It was a much smaller, much humbler organization than its predecessor. The species that had once ruled hundreds of worlds now governed only the refugee settlements that human mercy had allowed them to establish. Vasquez was not what the alien delegates had expected from humanity's representative. She was a career diplomat, not a military officer. She spoke softly and smiled often, showing none of the cold menace that Captain Volkov had displayed 6 months earlier. Yet everyone in the chamber understood that her gentle demeanor was backed by the most terrifying military force the galaxy had ever known. "Friends," Vasquez began, using the translator device that allowed her words to be understood by all present, "I want to thank you for agreeing to establish this new council. Earth believes that cooperation between species is essential for galactic peace and prosperity." Former High Chancellor Vexar, now simply called Speaker Vexar, listened to the humans' words with a mixture of admiration and fear. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had completely destroyed their enemy's ability to fight, then offered to help them rebuild. It was either the most generous act ever recorded, or the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare ever devised. Ambassador Vasquez, Speaker Vexar said, "My people are grateful for the assistance humanity has provided. The refugee settlements on New Zephyr are thriving. Yet I must ask, what are humanity's long-term intentions?" Vasquez nodded understandingly. "I know this transition has been difficult for all of you. Your species ruled this region of space for 3,000 years. Now you find yourselves dependent on human goodwill for your survival. That must be challenging." The understatement was almost cruel in its accuracy. The former rulers of the galaxy now lived in settlements that existed only because humanity allowed them to exist. Their technology was limited to what the humans deemed safe. Their territories were tiny compared to the vast empires they had once controlled. Admiral Morak, now reduced to governing a single world of Saurian refugees, spoke with barely controlled anger. "You destroyed our civilizations, then offered to help us rebuild them according to your specification. Is this what humans call mercy?" Vasquez turned to face the Saurian leader, her expression remaining calm despite the hostility in his voice. "Admiral, let me ask you a question. When your species first encountered humans 6 months ago, what did you expect to happen?" "We expected you to negotiate," Morak replied, "to accept reasonable limitations on your expansion in exchange for hegemony protection. And if we had refused those limitations," Morak was quiet for a moment, "we would have enforced them." "How?" "Military action against your colony." Vasquez nodded. "So your plan was to threaten our civilians, including children, until we submitted to your demands, and if we refused you would attack those civilians directly. That is how galactic politics work," Morak said defensively. "The strong guide the weak. Order is maintained through the threat of force. The strong guide the weak," Vasquez repeated. "An interesting philosophy. Tell me, Admiral, in this new galaxy, who would you say are the strong and who are the weak?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Everyone in the chamber understood the answer. Humanity now possessed the only functional military force in this region of space. Every other species existed only because humans allowed them to exist. Dr. Veltar of the Silicon Confederation spoke up. "Ambassador, what are humanity's long-term intentions? Will you rule us as we once ruled others?" Vasquez smiled, but it was not a cold expression like Captain Volkov's had been. "Doctor, humanity has no desire to rule other species. We want to build a galaxy where our children can grow up safely, where human colonies can prosper without fear of alien ultimatums." She gestured to the chamber around them. "This council exists to prove that such a galaxy is possible. You are here as equals, not as subjects. Your species are free to rebuild your civilizations, develop your cultures, even expand to new worlds. The only limitation is that you cannot threaten other species." "And who enforces that limitation?" asked the representative of the Crystal Mines, a species of energy beings who had once controlled vast networks of technological nodes. The same force that destroyed the hegemony fleet. Vasquez replied simply. Humanity will not tolerate threats to innocent civilians, regardless of which species makes those threats. The message was clear. The new galactic order would be based on the principle that military force couldn't be used to coerce civilian population. Anyone who violated that principle would face the same fate as the old hegemony. But what about growth? Speaker Vexar asked. What about expansion, trade, technological development? How can our species prosper under such restriction? Vasquez activated a holographic display showing the local region of the galaxy. Red zones marked the areas that had been consumed by nanobots, while green zones showed the refugee settlements and new colonies being established. Look at what we've accomplished in just 6 months, she said. The Zaparian agricultural colonies are producing food surpluses. The Saurian mining operations have identified rich asteroid fields for exploitation. The Silicon Federation has developed new computing technologies that don't trigger the nanobots' consumption protocols. It was true. In the 6 months since the hegemony's fall, the refugee species had made remarkable progress. Without the burden of supporting massive military forces, they'd been able to focus their efforts on peaceful development. Humanity has learned something important, Vasquez continued. Military strength is not the same as true power. The hegemony had the strongest fleet in the galaxy, but they were vulnerable because their entire civilization depended on that fleet. When the fleet was destroyed, everything else collapsed. She pointed to another section of the display showing human space. Human colonies are designed to be self-sufficient. Our ships carry tools for building rather than just weapons for destroying. Our expansion is driven by families seeking new homes, not military commanders seeking new territories to control. The delegates listened in silence as Vasquez outlined humanity's vision for the galaxy. It was radically different from the old hegemony system. Instead of a pyramid of power with the strongest species at the top, humanity proposed a network of independent civilizations bound by mutual non-aggression agreements. Of course, Vasquez said, this system only works if everyone follows the rule. The moment any species begins threatening others, the balance collapses. Admiral Morak leaned forward. And what happens to species that break these rules? Vasquez's expression became serious. The same thing that happened to the hegemony fleet. Humanity has learned that the only way to ensure lasting peace is to make the cost of war unacceptably high. She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of species that had once ruled the galaxy. 6 months ago, your civilizations made a choice. You decided that humanity should be forced to submit to your will through threats of violence. You learned that humanity makes different choices when threatened. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the chamber understood they weren't just establishing a new government but a new form of galactic civilization. One where military might couldn't be used to subjugate other species. Ambassador Dr. Velter said finally, what guarantee do we have that humanity will not become like the old hegemony? What prevents you from using your superior weapons to establish a human empire? Vasquez smiled sadly. Doctor, I think you misunderstand something fundamental about human nature. We didn't develop the nanobots because we wanted to conquer the galaxy. We developed them because we were afraid. She activated another display. This one showing the rapid expansion of human colony. For the first time in our species' history, we had children growing up on worlds other than Earth. When the hegemony threatened those children, we realized that conventional weapons wouldn't be enough to protect them. The truth was even more terrifying than conquest. Humanity hadn't set out to destroy galactic civilization. They had simply been willing to do whatever was necessary to protect their young. The nanobots were designed as a last resort. Vasquez continued, a weapon to be used only if humanity faced extinction. The fact that we deployed them shows how seriously we took your ultimatum. Speaker Vexar finally understood. You saw our threat as a threat to your species' survival. Of course we did, Vasquez replied. You demanded that we abandon our colonies and confine ourselves to a single star system. For a species that had just begun to spread among the stars, that was equivalent to a death sentence. The implications were staggering. The hegemony hadn't been destroyed by an aggressive human empire seeking conquest. They had been destroyed by a frightened species protecting its children. That somehow made the defeat even more complete. So what now? Asked the representative of the Hive Worlds. How do we move forward? Vasquez deactivated the displays and turned to face the assembled delegates. Now we build something better. A galaxy where species can grow and prosper without threatening each other. A galaxy where children of all species can look up at the stars and see possibilities instead of threat. She walked to the center of the chamber where a ceremonial table held the documents that would establish the new Galactic Council. Earth is prepared to sign these agreements as an equal partner. We offer our protection to any species that commits to peaceful development. We offer our friendship to any civilization that respects the rights of others. One by one, the delegates approached the table and signed the agreements. Each signature represented not just a commitment to peace, but an acknowledgement of the new reality. Humanity was now the dominant power in this region of the galaxy, not through conquest but through demonstrated capability. As the ceremony concluded, Vasquez looked out through the chamber's great windows at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, human children were growing up on distant worlds, safe from the threats that had once hung over their futures. It had cost the galaxy its old order, but perhaps something better would rise from the ashes. The aliens had wanted to know what humans would send instead of negotiators. Now they knew. Humans sent the future itself, written in the mathematics of mutual destruction and mutual survival. The galaxy would never be the same.